I'm going to read you a list of charges, and I want you to, at the end of this list, just tell me what you feel like is a reasonable sentence. Okay?
Okay.
So, count 1. Engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise. International cocaine distribution. The distribution of cocaine with Cifuentes. International distribution of cocaine with other South American suppliers. International distribution of cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. Count 2. International cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana manufacturing and distribution conspiracy. Count 3. Cocaine importation conspiracy. Count 4. Cocaine distribution. Count 5. International distribution of cocaine. Count 6. International distribution of cocaine. Note, this is the same legal offense charged as violation 2 in count 1. Count 7. Distribution of cocaine. Count 8. A distribution of cocaine. Count 9, use of firearms. Count 10, conspiracy to launder narcotics and proceeds. Now, if you were found guilty on all 10 of those accounts, and mind you, those 10 accounts span 8 pages of documented guilty or not guilty, with some sub-questions. Has the government proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the offense involved 5 kilograms or more of cocaine? On the count against the firearms, has the American government proved beyond a reasonable doubt that 1 or more firearms in this issue in count 9 were brandished? Has the government proved beyond a reasonable doubt that 1 or more firearms in count 9 that they were discharged? Have they proved that they were a machine gun? Have they proved that they were used on innocent civilians? If you were convicted of all 10 of those accounts, what do you suspect the verdict would be, the sentence would be? If the verdict is guilty, what's the sentence?
So setting my personal opinions to the side of the war on drugs.
Right.
Brandishing a weapon sounds something that I'm more concerned about. Again, I'm trying to set aside my personal opinions.
Right.
So brandishing weapons, again, like you said, was it against a civilian?
Brandishing, discharged.
Yes, it sounds
like
like
a machine gun.
Sounds like there's,
and used on civilians.
So it sounds like that is the most concerning to me.
Right. The others, I mean, whatever your stake on marijuana is, the others, heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine.
That's what I'm getting at. That and the international trafficking, so moving, it's likely large quantities.
All have to be more than 5 kilos.
I don't lightly.
So we're talking more than 12 pounds.
So I don't lightly approach putting someone in prison, but
sure,
something like that does sound serious. So I would think 30 years. That's half of someone's life potentially.
So these were the 10 counts of which one El Chapo was convicted. For all 10...
But he didn't have murder charges?
For all 10 of these counts, it's 8 pages worth of charges brought up against him. He was sentenced to a life sentence plus 20 years. I want to read you the charges that were brought up against somebody else.
Okay.
Drug trafficking and kingpin. Kingpin charge. And we'll get into a little bit about what that is, but it basically means that you are running a trafficking operation.
So the details would be important in this case to me as well.
Sure.
It sounds like there's no violence, so
none at all.
I'm less concerned. I'm not saying that I'm fine with all of that, but I'm less concerned with removing that person from society for forever. So I would think maybe 10, 15 years, depending on the details. How long was it going on, how much drugs, I don't know what kingpin means. That's
It's very
vague.
vague. It's very vague.
Because vague could mean, vague could mean kingpin. You could apply that title to El Chapo as well.
But it wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't applied to El Chapo.
So based off of just a blind reaction to both of those,
One drug trafficking charge versus 8 drug trafficking charges.
One without knowing the details, cold reaction, probably 30 years, maybe life. If it ends up being El Chapo, I'm thinking more life. But without knowing that ahead of time, 30 years. And the other one, again, cold reaction, maybe 15 years. So maybe half of that.
What if I told you that the second person with just 2 charges got twice the sentence that El Chapo did?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me.
2 life sentences plus 40 years.
It doesn't make sense to me, and we've been going over the details of this case. So it extra doesn't make sense to me.
This is episode 5, and the final episode of the Reverend and the Reprobate investigates the untold story of Ross Ulbricht, the Silk Road, and the Dread Pirate Roberts.
This call is from a federal prison. I want you to understand what it means to lose your freedom.
29-year-old Ross William Ulbricht, a.k.a. Dread Pirate Robert.
I am not the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Operating a sophisticated illegal drug website.
I inherited the ship from the previous Dread Pirate Roberts, just as you would inherit it from me.
The FBI spent 2 years trying to find the man behind the site.
The man I inherited from was not the real Dread Pirate Roberts either. Then he explained that the name was the important thing in inspiring the necessary fit. You see, no one can surrender to the Dread Pirate.
Ross Ulbricht. I'll finally leave prison, but I'll be in a body bag.
This is a story that, if you're trying to keep up with it, the amount of characters and the amount of twists and turns that are in it make for one of the most confusing flowcharts or atlases that you would ever look at. And yet, the central figure, the one whose life is going to be most affected by all of this, Ross Ulbricht, only seems to make cameos in this story. That's one of the things that you've mentioned to me as we've gone through these episodes is we talk about Ross in episode 1, founding the Silk Road, and then we talk about all of these other characters. Karpeles, Barr, Duryagan, McFarland, Kay. We
Bridges,
talk about
Force.
all of these other people and all of the things that they're doing, the way that they're structuring things, the way that the investigation is structured, and yet none of their lives are going to be negatively impacted by any of this that we've discussed so far. Well, maybe Force and Bridges, once they get found out. There's a conversation that happens because the U.S. Attorney General is putting a lot of pressure on these agencies. Thousands of man-hours have been devoted to the Silk Road. Congress is now aware of what's happening. The Senate knows that something's going on in the dark web, and Capitol Hill is putting pressure on the attorney's office. So they're going to put pressure on the agencies that they depend upon to do these investigations and basically say this: if you don't come up with somebody, we need to drop it. And a group of men who have been fighting for control over this are looking at what will be the scraps of a tattered investigation and potentially their careers. While this happens, Richard Kay, the assistant U.S. attorney in Baltimore, has on multiple occasions gone behind people's backs and met with the prime suspect and his attorneys in the NSA stronghold of Guam. A deal gets struck of some kind, and a name starts to surface. Ross Ulbricht, the guy that started the Silk Road. Somewhere in the course of the last few months leading up to this exact moment in time that we're looking at, October 1st, 2013, the Dread Pirate Roberts has reached out to Ross and convinced him to get involved with the Silk Road again. He's given him access to some of the DPR accounts, along with many of the files, the software, the records that are being used to run it. Now, these are things that do not appear on Ross's computer until just a few months before the arrest. Ross was on his laptop, logging in and out of the DPR account. The prosecutor in New York, Mr. Turner, has gone to Comcast, the cable company, using an outdated, outmoded third-party domain or third-party doctrine in order to gather evidence about what Ross has been doing when he's not on the dark web. And he puts together something that is circumstantial at best, but it's enough to get a warrant. Ross has just been given access to a shared Bitcoin wallet with over 144,000 Bitcoins. Now remember, we said that over the course of the life of the Silk Road, that Bitcoins on average were worth about 50 cents a piece. Now, in 2013, a Bitcoin was worth a lot more than that, but essentially, we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars at least. Potentially in the millions, depending on exactly what the exchange rate was. And part of that has to do with what you can actually get for it. On October 1st, 2013, Ross was in the local library, downloading the Colbert Report. There's some plainclothes FBI agents because the FBI had taken the investigation over, and they're watching him. As they're watching him, Jared Deryagin was across the street in a cafe, logged on to the Silk Road as Cirrus. Cirrus was a Silk Road admin who Deryagin had been able to flip a few months back and gain access to his user account. Deryagin, quote, initiated a chat to DPR's account, which popped up on Ross's screen now that he had access to it. Deryagin needed Ross to log in to DPR's Silk Road account so that the arrest team could claim that he was DPR at the time of the arrest. Now, mind you, DPR could have been any hundreds of people, and as we've said multiple times, the Dread Pirate Roberts, the whole impetus behind the character is that he could be anybody at any time. It's all about the name. But to make sure that Ross was logged in as DPR, in order to do this, Cirrus Deryagin sends a message to the DPR account. He said he was having difficulty with the admin tool he used to remove inappropriate flagged listings on the Silk Road. In response, Ross logs in. He waits for the page to load. As it bounces all over the globe through the Tor network, having little knowledge of the inner workings of the Dread Pirate Roberts enterprise, Ross messaged Cirrus. You did Bitcoin exchange before you started working for me, right? Something the real DPR would have known, having chatted and worked with Cirrus for many months. Once Ross logged in, undercover agents immediately created a diversion while others tore Ross's laptop from him and handcuffed him. At the arrest scene was FBI agent Thomas Kiernan. He was the first to take possession of the laptop, and the laptop is going to be one of the biggest points of contingency in the trial because he immediately starts punching commands into the computer completely and utterly against search and seizure protocols for cyber information. Kiernan plugs in a USB drive and tries to copy the files without producing any digital fingerprints, which are unique snippets of data that would ensure the copies made and matched the originals. But by doing so in this way, he begins to overwrite some of the metadata for those necessary files, the fingerprint, if you will, of each piece of data that comes through our phones, our computers, our hard drives. For instance, if you were to, Danley, look at a picture that I sent you, that picture would tell you where it was taken, what date it was taken on, whether or not it was a screenshot or an actual picture. If you were to even look at something that was printed out from a laser printer, the laser printer ingrains in that image the date, the time, and the location in which the page was printed. Metadata is one of the most powerful things that we use in order to trace where things are and when they actually happen. It is probably the most powerful tool in tracking anything that happens over the internet. Because a picture of a picture will still have the original information from the first picture embedded into it so that it can be traced. When the metadata starts to disappear, though, it's impossible to know things like when a software was loaded, how long it had been on a computer, whether or not that computer was the computer that wrote it. Kiernan triaged the laptop in the library for 1 to 3 hours, depending on when he was asked. Then he transported it to Ross's house about 8 blocks away. During that time, FBI agent Thomas Kiernan, that's Kiernan, was in sole possession of the laptop with nothing more than a few photos from his phone to document what he actually did to it. This is going to be such an important thing whenever the court case begins to unravel, because it follows none of the protocols for hardware and software search and seizure. On top of that, we already know that the Baltimore Homeland Security and DEA and the New York FBI have worked out some sort of deal with Mark Karpeles, and that Justin Herring, the AUSA in Baltimore, has told Duryagan that his prime suspect, Mark Karpeles, is no longer allowed to be investigated and charged with crimes. The attorney, the prosecutor in New York, seals a file that keeps Duryagan from being able to investigate anything that happens with Karpeles from that moment forward. And it all pushes towards Ross. This FBI agent with unchecked, unfettered access to Ross's computer ends up damaging nearly every bit of information on the hard drive, to the point where throughout the entire course of the trial, no one can tell when, how, where, or what was on the computer, what was online, and what Ross actually did or didn't know. At Ross's house, 2 agents find USB drives with the Silk Road files on them and a crumpled piece of paper with notes about the Silk Road vendor review system. At this point, Kiernan turned the laptop over to Christopher Beeson, a private contractor in San Francisco. Beeson starts to create things called tar archives. By creating these tar archives, he overwrites more of the metadata. He admitted he wasn't familiar with the guidelines of evidence collection and archiving, which clearly states not to run programs like tar that modify the metadata. And during the process, Beeson was stopped by a failure, and he was never able to determine the cause. He also testified that he could confirm that the files had been changed, but not copied properly.
I mean, this should have been good news for the defense team of Ross Ulbricht.
It should have.
Yeah.
All of this seems like...
This is destroying and tampering of evidence.
This seems
losing the chain of command, I believe is the term.
Right.
When they are chain of control or something like that. You know, when you have a piece of evidence, there are certain things you do. If it's a crime scene, you wear booties. You make sure that you're not leaving, you're not bringing in outside elements to destroy the evidence. That's exactly what happens with this laptop.
In any of these shows that we watch,
yeah,
if it's CSI, if it's NCIS, if it's Criminal Minds, if I'm trying to think, Law and Order, if anything like this happens, the lead character goes berserk. they lose
Psych,
it.
monk.
Bones.
Any
if
of them.
if these things happen, because they know that anything they get from that point on will be inadmissible in court. It won't be able to be used as evidence. But for Ross Ulbricht, that's not the case. By this time, it's almost 8 p.m. on October 1st, 2013. Beeson stops trying to make copies of the laptop's hard drive. He starts using DD, which is, quote, a powerful tool known as a disk destroyer. Simply because if it's misused, or if, in Beeson's case, you had previously gotten error after error about files being copied, it can cause irreparable damage to the data being manipulated. And several times, Beeson says, several times while trying to generate a digital fingerprint using DD, it kept failing. Eventually, Beeson just skips the fingerprinting altogether to make a copy, but that copy, because of how many times it's been manipulated now, once to the USB drive, once using tar, and once with the disk destroyer, the files that are copied no longer match the original. Derjagin's given a copy, this quote copy, that he reviews all night and into the next morning, and continued to find evidence of the involvement of Mark Karpeles. To quote Derjagin, he says, involvement with Karpeles and his associates to the Silk Road. Karpeles is purging everything after Ross's arrest, he wrote to Alfred and Turner. Now, Alfred, you have to remember, he's the one, the IRS agent that claims he found from a Google search Ross's email address. Turner is the attorney in New York that is the prosecutor. I know he was initially involved. Derjagin continued to submit reports to them on Karpeles' finances and communications, but to no avail. In fact, the government continued working with Karpeles after Ross's arrest, and information was passed from Karpeles to Baltimore. So the guy that broke the case is seeing that in real time, information off the Silk Road is disappearing. And with the copies that he has, manipulated and damaged though they are, he can tell what's going on. And he has even more information to link this back to his initial suspect. On October the 3rd, 2 days later, after the laptop was seized, Beeson turns his attention to the data in the laptop's RAM, the random access memory. And for the next 2 days, no one knows where the laptop is or what happens to it. Just that there were problems. Kiernan and Beeson had overwritten or modified the data. They'd changed everything that could have given a digital fingerprint up to that point. And Beeson admitted he wasn't quite sure how to do the RAM capture. He'd asked for assistance to look up documentation, but he tried everything he could think of, and eventually crashed the computer, losing an unknown amount of information and locking the laptop behind encryption. How true the copies that Beeson extracted was to the original that Kiernan seized is unknowable, nor can it be known exactly what Kiernan did with the laptop before handing it over to Beeson, or what data was lost when Beeson crashed the computer. It's indisputable, however, that the laptop was not handled professionally, and both agents ignored the order of volatility. They overwrote data unnecessarily. They used obsolete and unreliable methods. Files used in the government's case against Ross were modified as much as 6 hours after his arrest. No photos were taken to document their work. Nothing showed the correct time. and all of this evidence was admissible in trial.
That makes no sense. I don't get that.
There's so much about the days.
I mean, this should be a home run for the defense team.
The first 5 days of October in 2013, as they relate to this case, are completely mishandled. Like, I really don't care where you lie on Ross's guilt or innocence or any of that stuff, or what he actually should or shouldn't have been charged with, what his court case should be looked at. If we don't take a scrutinizing look at these things, that we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they should not have been admissible. Like, these are the kind of things that you look at with your kids.
I think I think every reasonable person would agree that this should not be admissible. So if the government walks into your house and takes your laptop and starts typing, and they say, we'll see you later,
and then it doesn't show, it disappears for 4 days,
I would go, so you're using that against me. What did you do? And we crashed it.
There's no way to know.
We have some evidence we want to...
We crashed it,
you can't use
and
that.
Now we can't turn it back on.
Yeah.
Right? Have you ever had your kid grab a hold of your phone and they type in the wrong password, like over and over and over again, and they lock you out of it forever?
I explained that to my son. And he luckily he got it pretty quick, but...
There's a certain point...
It doesn't seem like these guys did.
There's a certain point on most phones where...
It's 10 attempts or something. 6 attempts.
It will auto-wipe.
It locks, yeah.
So we've got our phones set to do that exactly. That if there's 15 attempts, not only is my phone locked for 20 minutes, but on the 16th attempt, everything on the phone starts to delete itself. It automatically resets and wipes everything, except for the ability for me to ping it. If somebody had my phone for 25 minutes, they could destroy everything that I've been working on for the last several months. All the text messages and things that I've got saved, all the pictures and stuff that we need for things that are going on at the church, for the prayer lists that we have, the updates that we have on that, my sermon notes, everything would just be gone in 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm. All your video games.
Yeah, all gone. Poof, done.
The least important.
But imagine if somebody did that and then said, "Oh, no, we got copies of everything, but they're not quite complete. And we can't produce the originals, but we think you should convict him on this." The Silk Road website was taken down.
I would expect to hear a word come up there, which is objection.
Oh, yeah.
Again, I wasn't there, so I don't know. I think this would be a home run for the defense team. I don't understand how this was admitted.
The Silk Road website was taken down on October 1st, 2013. And the New York prosecutors ensured that Ross would be prosecuted in New York instead of California, where he lived and was arrested. Ross spent the next 6 weeks in solitary confinement. He was taken and shipped from San Francisco to New York, while the government combed through the data that Kiernan and Beeson had destroyed.
It's horrifying.
In the weeks leading up to the trial, though, and potentially in some of the days prior to it, one or more of the few people with access to the evidence in Ross's case would come very close to removing all traces of conversations that happened between a person known as Not Wonderful and DPR. Now, remember, while all this is happening, there is an FBI agent, Mr. Tarbell, who is coordinating with Icelandic Metropolitan Police in where?
Reykjavik.
In Reykjavik. So they're there.
Again, I apologize for Icelanders.
They've been allowed to copy the servers there, and so they've got copies of everything that happened on the Silk Road up to the day that it's shut down. The other people that have access to that are Sean Bridges and Carl Mark Force, 2 dirty agents who will later be convicted and sent to prison for the way that they manipulated data on the Silk Road in order to exonerate themselves for extortion against DPR, who was a known entity at the time but never proven to be Ross. And Ross is never conferred with about this. Did they try to extort you? Do you remember these chats? In order to convict them. But more than that, somebody named Not Wonderful, which potentially could have been Bridges or Force.
We know it's not Kevin O'Leary.
Or Richard K.
Mm-hmm.
Combination of any of them. Or potentially even somebody else. Those conversations start to disappear. Whoever was behind the Not Wonderful account is suspected to have started deleting the conversations that he had with the Dread Pirate Roberts. This could also, though, have been anybody with a high-level access or a vested interest in seeing Ross convicted in order to get attention off of themselves. It could have been Carpellis. It could have been Ashley Barr. It could have been somebody that had access to the admin account of Curtis Green. However, this conversation was originally in evidence in several locations after the server was copied. The first version of the Silk Road forum, where 3 others were in backups, or the live version was in the FBI agency in New York. When Tarbell looked, all of the dialogue could not be found in any of the copies that were made. However, miraculously, a 5th copy of the conversation was overlooked by whomever removed the conversations from the first 4, as 4 copies were made. And the 5th, it was in a location where, quote, in a location in which someone would not expect it to be found, buried in the 4 terabytes of evidence dumped on Ross and his legal team. This copy appeared to be created manually by a Silk Road user with admin privileges and saved in his home folder on the Silk Road server. So whoever tried to cover up Not Wonderful's tracks didn't delete this obscure copy and, quote, failed to eliminate all evidence of those communications. Again, this looks like something that's going to be a huge boon for the defense. DPR, though, makes a critical mistake around this time. The Silk Road site has been taken down. While Ross was still in solitary confinement, locked in a monitored cell with no access to the outside world, let alone the internet, the Dread Pirate Roberts logs in to the Silk Road.
But I thought Ross Ulbricht was the Dread Pirate Roberts.
He gets onto one of the Silk Road forums, which was still running until late November after the Silk Road itself had been taken down. And there's irrefutable evidence that Ross was not the only person with access to DPR's accounts. Ross hires a New York attorney named Josh Drittel to come up with his defense. In his first courtroom appearance in New York, Ross was presided over by Magistrate Judge Kevin Fox to determine if Ross would be granted bail. During this hearing, all kinds of things get brought up. They brought up the fact that drugs were traded on the Silk Road. They brought up the black market. And the lead prosecutor, Mr. Turner, claimed at the hearing that Ross was behind the murder for hire involving Curtis Green. And he brought up information from chat logs about 5 other murder for hire attempts. Now, Drittel was ambushed the night before with these allegations. He didn't have any time to consult with anybody about them, and that's going to be thematic throughout this trial. So what happens is that he wasn't able to prepare a defense. Meanwhile, an investigation is going on, and 2 federal agents are being confronted by the AUSA's office and the U.S. Attorney's office saying, hey, Mr. Force, Mr. Bridges, we found evidence of impropriety with an ongoing investigation. After using them to deprive Ross of bail, Turner dropped the allegations about murder for hire because he realized, not too far into this, that Force and Bridges were going down, and that the murder for hire scheme on Curtis Green was going to dissipate with them. However, he used it to his advantage in order to block Ross's bail. With Ross secure in prison, the prosecutor's first communication with him was a threat. No written plea was ever made. Instead, Ross was verbally told that if he did not plead to the charges he was arrested for, which carried 10 years to life in prison, then the prosecutors would add the continuing criminal enterprise charge, also known as the kingpin charge, which we did see in El Chapo.
Yep.
Count number 1, raising the minimum to 20 years, but also giving them the opportunity to tack on a second life sentence. Not knowing the risks of going to trial and being advised by his attorneys, Ross chose to go to trial. On February 4th, 2014, Ross was indicted. From the onset, Ross and his attorney Drittel challenged the prosecutors on cases of legal grounds. There were so many things they didn't know and they couldn't find, and yet time after time after time, Ross and his attorney are blocked. One of the defenses that Drittel uses is that companies like AT&T are essentially in the same position as the Silk Road, not to throw shade at AT&T, but because of what we've come to find out about the third-party doctrine, that was a way in which people could communicate or people could grab information from our cell service providers, our internet service providers, that they can go in and see every website and anything that we've done and that we've looked at during that time. Now, Drittel is making the case that the Silk Road was just an avenue through which people exchanged things, no different than a back alley. But we know, as Drittel states in court, we know that people are using those networks for drug sales. They're texting, they're making phone calls. I know that. It's foreseeable to me. If I'm selling drugs to one person using my cell phone, does that not make every other drug seller on AT&T a co-conspirator of mine? Does that make AT&T a co-conspirator? Certainly not. Ross's legal team makes several arguments to this effect, showing that the government's charges could not be applied to the alleged conduct and violated his constitutional rights. In spite of this, our judge, Judge
Catherine Forrest,
denies Ross's motion to dismiss the indictment. And time after time throughout the rest of this court case, and we're not going to get into every detail of it because we literally have, I'm looking at 7 pages right here, plus
there's a couple of episodes
all of the other
at least,
things, yeah,
of
the court case,
the court story.
So we're going to hit the highlights. And we're going to talk about the things that the U.S. government actually prosecutes against Ross versus the things that got blocked by Judge Forrest. We're going to start with finding the servers. Now, we talked a little bit about the way that they claimed to have found, this is Agent Alford, who claimed to have found Ross's email address with just a Google search.
Yeah, he's a sleuth.
Well, remember Agent Tarbell from the FBI? He claimed under oath that they had an agreement with the Reykjavik Metropolitan Police. Quote, examining the individual packets of data being sent back by the Silk Road website, he noticed that the headers of some of the packets reflected a certain IP address. When he typed in the IP address into an ordinary non-Tor web browser, a part of the Silk Road login screen, the CAPTCHA prompt appeared, thus confirming the IP address in the headers was the IP address of the Silk Road. Tarbell's explanation was closely scrutinized because Tor is supposed to prevent exactly what he claimed he did. Cybersecurity experts around the world, including Robert Graham of Arata Security, Brian Krebs of Krebs Security, Nicholas Weaver, researcher at ICSI, and Berkeley, were highly skeptical, as well as our very own Moss, who said, when presented with this information, that's impossible. Weaver says that I find it was surprising that given a chance to provide a cogent on the record explanation for how they discovered the server, they instead produced a statement that has shown to be inconsistent with reality and that they knew it was inconsistent with reality. Tarbell responded by saying he didn't save any record of his work. The most rudimentary standards of computer forensic analysis. The details are vague. Graham notes, Graham of Arata Security, that it's impossible for anybody with technical skills such as myself to figure out what he actually did. And, quote, second is the problem that some of the details are impossible, such as seeing the IP address in the packet of headers. He saved none of the forensic data. You'd have thought that had this been real, he could have at least captured packet logs or even screenshots of what he did, end quote. They go on to explain these guys that are in internet security that know how to get in and out and around all of this stuff. These are experts in internet security that are looking on the dark web for information that might be spilled. That not only was this something that was completely impossible to be able to happen, but many of them believe that it wasn't the FBI who discovered the hidden Silk Road server at all, but rather the NSA. Graham says, quote, we believe the FBI is using parallel construction, which we discussed last episode, as something that was discovered and found out and exposed by Edward Snowden. We'll start the quote again. We believe the FBI is using parallel construction, creating a plausible story of how they found the server to satisfy the courts, but the story isn't true. I am a foremost expert on this sort of thing, and I think Christopher Tarbell is lying. End quote. Given the massive breadth of the way that the NSA conducts their investigations and the fact that Karpeles was known to have gone to Met AUSA Richard K. in Guam, it's likely that that's where the information came from, according to these cyber experts. Whether the truth was concealed for the prosecution or not, they shot down the NSA's involvement idea because Ulbricht offers no evidence of governmental misconduct to support this sweeping claim. He and his defense are conjuring up a boogeyman. The prosecution called Drattel's search for how the servers were actually found a, quote, pointless fishing expedition aimed at vindicating his misguided conjecture about the NSA being a shadowy hand behind the government investigation. Yet months later, Edward Snowden would release information that said that the NSA, this is on March the 8th, 2013, and an NSA memo stated that they were using these exact capabilities of parallel construction in their missions to, quote, cyber targets that utilize online e-currency. They worked urgently to target Bitcoin users in the months leading up to Ross's arrest. Now remember, the Silk Road accounted for 1/3 of all Bitcoin traffic in the world at that time. In addition, it's alleged that Turner, the prosecutor, lied to the court about how the government seized the server once Tarbell, quote, found it. There's supposed to be a mutual legal assistance treaty with Iceland that would have let them be able to just ship the server over, no questions asked. But Turner later admitted that this is not technically correct, as the U.S. does not have an MLAT with Iceland. The legal basis for the warrant appears to have been unimportant, though, to Judge Forrest, because she ruled that the defense's motion to suppress certain evidence was, quote, denied. Time and time again, either everything that we've seen in Judge Judy and everything that we've seen on any of these court cases, everything I've ever read in a John Grisham book, or for that matter, in a legal review, is false. Because it should have been inadmissible. Every bit of the case that the government has on Ross Ulbricht is bad. It's obtained story, nefariously.
Yeah, the story points not only to nefarious actions to obtaining it, illegal actions to obtaining it, and then tampering with evidence, and then submitting it. And we see later the cover-up with Force and Bridges. And then their conviction.
one of the things I think that is so strange about this whole case are the things that Turner insists upon. Now, Turner is the prosecutor from New York. Turner insists that Judge Forrest explicitly forbade Josh Drattel, Ross's attorney, from conveying to the jury the political and philosophical motivations behind the Silk Road, which we've talked about ad nauseam.
It was the first thing we talked about.
What's so interesting about that is when Judge Forrest brings down her sentence on Ross, she will cite
she quotes it, yeah,
that he was misguided, but that she does not believe that his political philosophies have changed since he started the site, and therefore she was obligated to bring down upon him the biggest sentence she could. The interesting part about that is that Turner prevented the jury from knowing anything about the political and philosophical motivations so that they would not be able to sympathize with Ulbricht. Which brings us to our boys, Force and Bridges. Now, it's obvious that Force and Bridges, from the very beginning of this story, or once the investigation goes beyond the Chicago branch, have been making deals with DPR. They've been blackmailing him. They've been extorting funds from him. They've been adding to and deleting from things in real time on the Silk Road. They've created many false identities, and we've outlined several of them throughout the course of our investigation, if we can call it that. But one of the things that we start seeing in April of 2014 that gets these guys busted is Carl Mark Force starts using Tor not to connect to Mount Go, not to connect to the Silk Road, not to do anything in relation to his undercover investigation that he's supposed to have had a part in, but to connect to Bitstamp. Bitstamp is an online Bitcoin exchange similar to Mount Go. But Bitstamp has this really weird security and theft prevention procedure. So when Force logs on to Bitstamp, the very first thing that the Bitstamp people ask him is, why are you using Tor to access our server? He says, I utilize it for privacy. Force says, quote, don't particularly want NSA looking over my shoulder, smiley face. Bitstamp's management replies that they found Force's reply strange, and they froze his account immediately. Upon doing that, all transactions, his entire history associated with his account, was requested by Force to be deleted. He's trying to cover his tracks, but it was too late. California Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Hahn opened up an investigation in both Force and Bridges. In early May, Force resigns from the DEA and quickly begins hiding the evidence and the money that he's extorted. He wired $235,000 to an offshore account in Panama after learning about the government's investigation. By the end of May, he had legal representation and attended an official interview in which he was interrogated by Hans. Bridges was also interviewed with his lawyer and a high-level superior from the U.S. Secret Service multiple times while the case for Ross is going on. On December 15th, a few weeks before the trial begins, Judge Forrest holds a hearing to get to the bottom of the issue. However, it was sealed off from the public. No reporters were allowed to attend, and Ross's family was forbidden to attend. According to court documents, Turner was joined by his co-counsel, Timothy Howard, that argued that the investigation into Force's corruption had to be kept a secret, could not be used or brought to light, as it would alert the suspect that he was under investigation. But we have to remember, at this time, Force had already been interviewed at least twice, once with his attorney. They were afraid he might flee. But the truth of the matter is, Catherine Hahn had already had Force under investigation for 8 months. The only reason for maintaining secrecy in the eyes of Josh Drattel was to make sure that Ross could not use the information in his defense. The government misled the court, Drattel said at a press conference later. Quote, the agents knew exactly what they were being investigated for, so the notion of keeping it a secret was essential to the investigation or even to helpful to the investigation was simply not true. However, this was not the only falsehood that Turner put forth in court. When asked how deeply Force had penetrated the Silk Road when he and Bridges took over Green's admin account, according to the transcript, the judge asks, quote, could he have faked being someone else, end quote. Turner replies, quote, no, you can't do that, no. However, in the court cases against Force and Bridges, it comes out that this is exactly what they did. Bridges had even taken over the accounts of vendors, effectively becoming them online, all while pretending to be Curtis Green. The assistant, the co-counsel, Timothy Howard, went on to say that he did not receive root administrative privileges. He didn't even have privileges to do anything on the site. The judge replies, quote, what was the list of things that Green could do? He had the ability to reset passwords and PIN numbers. The judge asks, if he could reset passwords and PIN numbers, could he have utilized the accounts? Could he have reset any passwords? Howard replies, that's something we would have to confirm and to look at. If you can reset somebody's password, don't you have access to their accounts?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, just to take a quick break from, like, just reading the research of this. That's what that means, right?
The common security now is if you reset password, it would text you or send you an email.
Right.
Which is much easier to hack into if you're tech savvy at all.
But if I've got your PIN number and I can reset it, if I'm on your laptop.
Especially if you're logged in already, it should not be that difficult.
Absolutely.
As we see.
And if somebody on the back end was able to do that, you skip the entire
I believe the word for
it.
that evidence is tainted.
And yet, not only was it not tainted in the eyes of the court, the fact that there was an ongoing investigation about the guys that tainted the evidence was inadmissible.
None of this makes any sense to me. I don't get it.
Turner was determined to keep this information from leaving the sealed hearing or being argued before the jury, and he told Judge Forrest deliberately and calculated lies, end quote. And she ultimately ruled in favor of the government. In fact, it would be just 7 weeks after Ross's trial that Force and Bridges were indicted and their corruption activity on the Silk Road site publicly revealed. Ulbricht's legal team asked that his trial be postponed until after the trials of Force and Bridges, but under the guise of the right to every American for an expedited and speedy and fair trial, they pushed it forward. The overarching reason believed by Drattel and by many in the U.S. justice system that have looked at this and said that it's questionable, though they have not been able to have a crack at the case because they're in lower level courts. It seems as though the government was trying to find their collar. To wrap up, because we could go on and on and on.
And in fact, we may do more if there's continued interest in this. There's more information to go into. But I think the story is well told at this point of what involvement Ross had. The trail of mishandled evidence, of corruption.
In the government's case.
In the government's case, as proven in court, but with the United States versus Mark Force and Karl Marx Force and Bridges. People that had the ability to and proven in court to alter the records inside of Silk Road.
To that end, when the government presents its case, during the trial, Judge Forrest blocks several more things that we've covered in this story. She blocks the cross-examination of Jared Duryagan. He's not allowed to say the name Karpeles, as it involves the initial investigation that he started back in 2011 in Chicago, as it involves all of the investigation in 2012, and as it involves anything that has to do with Karl Marx Force or Sean Bridges. Karpeles' name was stricken from the record when it was mentioned, and over the weekend, Judge Forrest said that nothing said about Karpeles would be allowed in the court, as to not confuse the jury. When asked how many Dread Pirate Roberts there could be, referring to different Dread Pirate Roberts under investigation by Duryagan, the mention of Karpeles and Barr was brought forth, and Duryagan said it could have been either of those men, as well as Andrew Jones at various times, all stricken from the record by Judge Forrest, and the names were not allowed to be used earlier, or the names were not allowed to be used later. Key witnesses: Andreas Antonopoulos and Stephen Bellevin, two cybersecurity experts. They were key parts of the defense as they looked at things we've already covered. How they got a hold of the servers, how they were able to find the IP address of the Silk Road to begin the investigation initially, how they were able to find Ross with the pen trap. The day that they were supposed to be called to the stand, Turner.
The destruction of the laptop. I don't know if you hit that.
Yeah. And the destruction of the laptop and how they couldn't tell where the files came from, what they were, where they were going.
And the chain of evidence that was broken, if that's the right term.
Right.
That it left, there was one person in control of it, seen, witnessed by many, tapping away.
We've seen in court documents from the Karl Marx Force and Sean Bridges case, as well as several others that have been brought up as Silk Road cases over the course of the last several years, that all of those things not only could have happened, but some of them certainly did happen. The day that two expert witnesses on cybersecurity were called, New York Attorney Prosecutor Turner appeals to Judge Forrest and said he hasn't had time to look at the data and to talk to the witnesses, and asked that the cybersecurity experts, the experts in metadata, not be allowed to testify on behalf of the defense. When the defense asks for a delay so that the prosecutor has time to talk to them, he's denied. When the defense makes the case that 4 terabytes of documents, over 5 billion pages worth of information was laid on their desk in one night, that they weren't given time to investigate, that it was continued to be admissible, Judge Forrest doesn't apologize, but essentially comes back with a response of that's the way the cookie crumbles. When it all comes down to it, many of the people that were involved in the Silk Road ended up taking a fall. The guy that did all the software behind it, a guy known as Variety Jones, recently was sentenced to 8 months. The guy that invented actually the Silk Road 2, which was a larger site than the original Silk Road. Larger not by just the amount of transactions, but also by the amount of commerce. Because the Silk Road was so popular, the Silk Road 2 is taken down, and that guy is confined not to a jail cell, not to solitary confinement, but to house arrest. Carl Mark Force and Sean Bridges for their part in impropriety in the investigation, for extortion, for perjury, and for a made-up murder-for-hire plot end up with a combined 13 years. In a last-ditch effort, Drittel moves for a mistrial, claiming, "You have put the burden of proof on the defense to prove Ross's innocence, not the burden of proof on the prosecution to prove his guilt." And the motion was denied. In closing arguments, Turner and Howard summarized that their narrative and dismissed the few arguments Drittel was permitted to make. The jury had no way of knowing that Drittel was hamstrung because they were under an anonymity order, which was not revealed until after the case was done. Turner told the jury there were no little elves that put all of that evidence on Ross's computer. He also brought up the murder-for-hire plot, which was never tried and something that was never addressed during trial. And yet he knew all along that there were indeed little elves within the law enforcement community that not only had the means, but the motive to put things onto Ross's computer, and that they themselves were about to be tried for those exact crimes. It took slightly over 3 hours for the jury to deliberate while Ross sat in a cell awaiting his fate. He was found guilty on all accounts, including the kingpin charge, with a mandatory 20-year sentence. When it was time for the judge to bring the sentence on to Ross, the judge gave him 2 life sentences plus 40 years, stating, "The reasons that you started this Silk Road were philosophical, and I don't know that it is a philosophy left behind." Ross was unable to, quote, "convince her that he had abandoned his dangerous ideas. Otherwise, she may have spared him from a life sentence." A philosophy which Judge Forrest would not let the jury hear so that they wouldn't become sympathetic.
So I'm asking myself, I think we're all asking ourselves, why 2 life sentences plus 40 years? Again, we've hammered this into the ground.
Yeah.
Double El Chapo, who I think most people are familiar with.
Yeah. One of the most notorious criminals
these are 2
of our
different
time.
people, 2 different cases, but
Right.
It should be noted the extreme sentence here. And so again, with the question of why so extreme of a sentence, I think Jeff John Roberts, a reporter for Fortune, quoted, and I think he sums it up very well, why the sentence was handed down so harsh. Why did U.S. District Judge Catherine Forrest treat Ulbricht, whose only weapon was a keyboard, more severely than many murderers and child molesters? For Ulbricht supporters, the life sentence confirmed their suspicions that the FBI and Judge Forrest chose to make Ulbricht a scapegoat for America's failed drug policy and to punish him for using a technology they could not control. I agree with that assessment. And if you're moved like we are, I suggest that you go to freeross.org, which is run by Ross's mother.
Yeah, his mother and father, the Ulbrichts.
Yeah, she's actually the CEO on her LinkedIn page.
Yeah.
So go join the 500,000 plus and growing signatures of people that do not want to necessarily say that Ulbricht did nothing wrong, but
Right, like we ourselves wouldn't say that.
yeah, he doesn't say that.
No, he created a marketplace in which, yes, it certainly fit all the parameters that he had, but it was incredibly dangerous. The stuff that he sold or that was able to be sold and bought is illegal to possess and is certainly dangerous in the hands of children. And there is the potential, because it was so unregulated, that kids could have gotten a hold of it. Mm-hmm. What he did by creating the Silk Road was irresponsible at best and criminal at worst. Mm-hmm. But he's been in prison for 8 years now.
And from the judge's own words, he's there due to philosophical differences.
If we're going to allow the judicial system to make judgment calls on sentencing based on somebody's philosophy, we have entered into an Orwellian state. This is not the burden of proof. This is not innocent until proven guilty. This is the thought police. Mm-hmm. And the judge did not even stop short of saying that. She sentenced him based on her perception of his philosophy, which they were not allowed to present and discuss during the case based on her own ruling behind closed doors. You're right. If you want to get involved,
join us.
We're not saying that Ross is innocent.
Yep.
What we
Double
are saying
life sentence
is that this
plus
is
40
ridiculous.
years is beyond mind-blowing. Is beyond atrocious.
You took the guy's life away.
Yeah.
And you gave life to corrupt DEA and Secret Service agents, to guys that have started this same type of website, on and on and on and on. Mm. If you really are passionate about doing something that could make a difference, go check out freeross.org. Give your support to Lynn. Thank you guys for listening. This is our first try at an investigative series, and we had a lot of fun doing it. Mm-hmm. It ended up being a little longer. So much of this is really in depth. Also, a quick addendum. I know in the beginning of this episode we said that El Chapo didn't get the kingpin charge, and that is a pretty blatant misreading of official court documents by two guys who aren't used to reading official court documents. El Chapo did get the kingpin charge, and that is part of the reason why he got life in prison plus the 20 years being the kingpin charge. Unfortunately, Ross got that and then some on trafficking charges that were much less than what was put forth against El Chapo. So we do want to make sure that that correction is made, because we know as you've listened to the episode, you heard us go, oops, El Chapo did get the kingpin charge, and we want to acknowledge it here at the end. Thanks for listening. Make sure that if you liked this, let us know. If you want to hear more content like this from the Rev and Rep, let us know. Give us a review. If you're on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review. Let us know what you thought of it. If you're on Podchaser is a huge help for us if you listen there, because you can give reviews on Apple and Android devices on Podchaser. Make sure that you leave us a review. Let us know what's going on. Special thanks from us to Lynn Ulbricht and the people at freeross.org for their cooperation in providing us information and court documents and things like that as we've done this investigation. And also to the man behind the scenes, Colton Templin.
Yep.
Colton has taken a huge undertaking in putting music behind all this, coming up with sound effects, producing something that is way out of the norm for us. He did a phenomenal job. And so one big thanks to Colton for all of his help and efforts there. For the rest of you, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening to the Rev and Rep Investigates.
Please stop. You are hurting me.